Hello, boys and girls. Somehow I feel I ought to start off like that, because I'm sitting down in a chair, and the reason why I am sitting is because I am going to read you a story. This is a story about... Actually, the real power of a fable is that you get to decide what it's about. The really great fable writers are those who know how to create something which you can interpret according to how you need to interpret it. So, I'm going to get stuck in. Here we go. The story is called Old MacGregor Had a Farm. MacDonald and MacGregor both had farms, on either side of a large pond which they shared. The animals of their two farmyards made daily use of the pond, and apart from some occasional confusion over whose ducks were whose, and squabbling among chickens, which is normal for chickens, farmers and farmyard animals got along pretty well, as long-established neighbours should. But MacDonald and MacGregor had different ideas about how best to run a farm. MacDonald's farm, to the untrained eye, might seem quite traditional, old-fashioned even. You could easily imagine that he had designed and organised it to conform to descriptions found in children's songs and stories. He had a big red tractor, a green Land Rover, and 2 border collie dogs. He had every kind of farm and farmyard animal you might care to imagine. There really was a baa here and an oink oink there, and every other letter of the alphabet. It was a noisy place. And MacDonald didn't neglect his crops either. His fields were always busy growing, either to feed the numerous animals or cash crops to sell. MacDonald had inherited a thriving farm from his father, old MacDonald, and the farm continued to thrive, with the occasional struggles that every farmer has, such as the fluctuating prices of feed, fuel and fertiliser, and other economic essentials, not all of which start with an F. MacDonald's management style was ad hoc. He knew all his animals by name, and he kept a close watch on his fields. He rotated his crops on the 4-field system and chose seed varieties according to whatever seemed to be growing well. But it was in his nature to find solutions to problems as they arose, rather than to try to guess what problems might arise and then prevent them. To do so meant, of course, that he always needed a surplus, and he usually had one. If once or twice he'd had to go cap in hand to a neighbour, or worse still, the bank, both were always willing to help him over a bad patch, because all knew that he was a good farmer who would make good on his promises. MacGregor inherited his farm from his parents too. When he inherited it, it was already a thriving modern farm. Old MacGregor and Mrs. MacGregor both believed in staying up to date with the latest methods and machinery, but their farm differed from old MacDonald's mostly in that there were slightly less animals and the machinery had slightly shinier paint. Before MacGregor inherited the farm, however, he went off to agricultural college to study, whereas MacDonald learned farming on the job, from his parents, from his neighbours, from hired hands, from the animals, the soil, and the sky. MacGregor completed his degree, mastering seed equality and land management, among other things, and went on to complete a doctorate in farming, where he specialised in geology and soils. Upon returning home, MacGregor immediately began a great work of audit, study and research. He examined the land, looking at soils, geology, native and introduced plants, exposure and shelter, temperature, rainfall, hours of light and dark. He toured surrounding farms, looking at species of plant and breeds of animal, the crops that thrived and the animals bred for the local climate. MacGregor compiled an evaluation of all of his farm's existing assets and made a plan to transform it. Over the next few years, MacGregor sold off many animals and unneeded machinery. With plenty of pasture, he expanded the dairy herd, and he installed an on-demand milking robot. This is a real thing, by the way. He sold off ploughs, harrows and drills, and bought a big direct seeding machine for zero-till agriculture. He replanted hedgerows and copses. He redirected streams to improve irrigation and drainage. He laid a thick layer of construction aggregate on all the farm tracks so vehicles would consume less fuel driving around the farm, although many neighbours considered that a vanity. But they also noticed that he still kept ducks on the pond, even though this had little ecological and zero economic benefit. It was a good sign that he was nonetheless a countryman at heart. MacGregor's transformed farm soon became known as the MacGregor system. Student farmers came to visit and study, and MacGregor system farms began springing up throughout the county. All this to say that the two farms were pretty different. But there was one thing that MacGregor didn't know, because his parents had never got around to telling him. MacDonald, who had grown up on his farm, could hardly fail to know. And that was that the pond that the two farms shared had magical water. Any animal that drank from the pond could talk as well as you or I. In some cases, better. Now, MacGregor selling off so many of his animals came as something of a shock to the animals of MacDonald's farm. So many neighbours leaving all at once is always unsettling, and most of the new arrivals on MacGregor's farm never came to the pond at all. Now, it might seem petty, but since MacGregor had kept his ducks, and since ducks can be proud, MacGregor's ducks had become the focus of resentment in the MacDonald farmyard. Look at them, swanning about in the pond like they owned the place, MacDonald's chickens would chatter. Who do they think they are? Swans? MacDonald's pigs would mutter. MacDonald's ducks were frequently driven from the water by MacGregors, who had become aggressive and intolerant. To be fair, the behaviour of MacGregor's ducks was probably due to unhappiness, but this doesn't make it acceptable. But as will happen on a farm, from time to time an animal gets loose. MacGregor had bought plenty of cows, and cows are not curious. But a startled or confused cow may wander off in the wrong direction, and from time to time the MacDonald animals would see a cow on the MacGregor side of the pond. In fact, this became an increasingly frequent occurrence, and it was always the same cow, and soon as she could talk, the ducks named her 40, as this was the number on the tags in her ears. MacGregor himself was a little baffled at how the same cow always seemed to escape. Of course, MacDonald knew why, as he knew the secret to the pond. Maybe he didn't know that MacGregor was ignorant of the magic, or maybe he just wanted to keep it to himself. 40 the cow tried to encourage other animals into the farmyard where they could drink from the lake. She was lonely, and the MacGregor ducks were not good company. She had no successes with the other cows and considered the sheep a dead loss. MacGregor had a huge flock of very dim sheep who barely responded to a snarling sheepdog and completely ignored a friendly, if somewhat gawky, cow. But one day, 40 was about to wander back to her field when the flock was running pell-mell along the lane between pastures. One small, blank-eyed ewe was caught on the open farm gate. 40 walked over, gently nudged the ewe into the farmyard, and deftly kicked the gate closed behind her. Most of the rest of the day went by before the ewe was sufficiently overtaken by thirst to look for something to drink. But eventually nature took its course, and 40 had a friend, although not a very challenging one. The ewe was named the Sheep by the ducks, since any other name seemed to slip from the ewe's mind like water from a duck's feathers. 40 had better luck with the pigs. They were huge, fat, and mostly slow-moving, but far from slow-witted. A couple of them seemed to catch on quite quickly when 40 kicked open the gate to their field and began trying to encourage them out. She only managed to get one of them to the pond. Upon drinking the water, she immediately named herself Miranda, for as she explained, a talking pig is indeed to be wondered at by all. And then Miranda the pig politely explained to the ignorant 40 and the sheep that the name Miranda comes from the Latin and means that which inspires wonder or must be wondered at. Miranda the pig took a keen interest in how MacGregor's farm was run and tried to explain many of the details to 40 and to the sheep, although most of it went over 40's head. But she was glad to have company. During this time, relations between the MacGregor and MacDonald ducks had continued to deteriorate. A few times it had come to blows. The matron of the MacDonald ducks, whose name was one of many, decided something had to be done, and so she went to consult with Rab, MacDonald's old horse. Rab was known to have MacDonald's ear, or at least MacDonald often talked to Rab, but there was debate among the animals as to whether MacDonald knew that Rab understood everything that was said. "Rabby lad," one of many began, "our once friendly neighbours seem set on becoming enemies. We must do something about this, but I have no ideas." Rab munched on some oats and scraped a hoof along the cobbles. "You should talk to the man himself," Rab said after a while, and then whinnied theatrically. "Are you daft, boy?" "Nay," said the horse. "None of we animals talks to the man." "But ye shall have to," Rab replied firmly. One of many sighed, quacked, and left. Stepping out of the stable, she looked over the damp farmyard through the drizzle. It was a nice place to live and worth more than bad neighbours. But good neighbours were better. So she tightened her resolve, ran to the water's edge, and flapped into the air. Ducks fly very fast for their size, and when they fly low, they zip and sizzle. She looped repeatedly around the farm until she spotted MacDonald, who was eating a sandwich atop his red tractor. On the third attempt, she landed on the engine cowling, which was warm but not uncomfortably hot, even for sensitive duck feet. MacDonald smiled a good-humoured, friendly smile. "Madam, one of many," he said formally. "What can I do for you this fine day? Will you want a corner of ham sandwich?" "Thank you, no," she replied, making a good show of not seeming surprised. One of many was not one to exchange pleasantries. Ducks really don't have time for idle chatter and make all of their chatter as specific and meaningful as possible. She appraised him rapidly of the situation and asked what she should do. MacDonald was impressed. She had not come to ask him to sort it out for her, but to ask him to suggest a solution that she could apply herself. "I expected something like this eventually," MacDonald said. "What you need is to create something that will bring the animals together." "I don't think they'll agree." "It has to be clever, and I have an idea." It so happened that same year there had been a big international sporting competition at the capital city. Teams of athletes had come from every country in the world to create a spectacle together, competing to see who was the fastest, or who was the strongest, or the most enduring, in a spirit of friendly competition. It had made everyone feel very positive about international relations, and this inspired MacDonald to suggest something similar. He told one of many, "Mind, you give the idea directly to Miranda the pig. She is bossy and arrogant, but she will like the idea, and the MacGregor ducks will have no choice but to agree." One of many did as he suggested, although it was with a certain trepidation that she circled around the MacGregor farm to find her way to Miranda's hut. Miranda the pig was flattered to have been charged with the responsibility, but said that they must agree on some impartial judges. There were really only 4 possibilities. Some wild animals visited the pond from time to time. There was the mole, who was bright, honest, reliable, but almost completely blind. There was the fox, who was quick, clever, and sharp-eyed, but almost completely dishonest. There was the heron, who was not very bright, but patient, quick, and easily distracted by the flash of a scale under water. And lastly, there was the deer, who was good-tempered, had keen eyes and ears, but was terrified of almost everything and everyone. They did not ask the deer, as they could not find her. However, fox and heron agreed to act as referees, and mole would be on hand to make a decision if there was any disagreement. One of many, and Miranda, discussed at some length the events that the shared Pond Olympics, for so they agreed to call it, would include. It seemed obvious that there could be events on land, in the water, and in the air. The mole opined that at least one event could take place under the ground, but they politely ignored him. After much discussion, they settled on 3 races that each team should, for fairness, enter 2 athletes in each race, and that made a team of 6 each. The land race was simple, twice around the pond. There were a couple of fences, but the combined bulk of Rab, Forty, and Miranda could easily push them over. The air race was also simple, twice around the big barn. Competing animals could take off from wherever they wanted, but must not land before completing 2 laps. The water race was a little more complicated, as there was argument about exactly what crossing the pond might mean. Rab and Forty could both get almost to the middle of the pond just walking, and would only have to swim a metre or 2. So it was decided that the water race was twice across the pond, but swimming on, in or under for most of the distance. And since Heron had good eyes for seeing under the water, he would ensure that the rules were obeyed. Out of a joint concern that as many animals be involved as possible, Miranda and one of many agreed that each side should select as many different types of animal as they could. Unfortunately, in the MacGregor farmyard, only Miranda, Forty, the sheep, and all the ducks could talk, so their team would have to be half duck. But this wasn't a problem for 2 of the events in any case. It also meant that the MacDonald team would have to include at least 1 chicken. You will have noticed that thus far the chickens have not featured much in this story, and there is a reason for this. Chickens are noisily, badly behaved, ill-mannered creatures. The cockerel is angrily aggressive to the point of madness, but this is understandable, as the hens are recalcitrant and uncooperative to the point of despair. The MacDonald team would therefore consist of Rab, Ock, one of the collie dogs, Stew, the less mad of the 2 cockerels, Art, a drake considered especially energetic, Mary, the Jersey cow, and Muriel, the sheep. The MacGregor team, along with 3 non-ducks, would include 3 ducks, who, for the sake of the competition, would be given temporary names, and the ducks chose to name them a duck, this duck, and another duck. Preparation for the big event was rather different on the 2 sides of the pond. On the MacDonald side, it consisted of one of many and Rab agreeing who should enter each race. The land race would be run by Rab and Mary the cow, as they were the fastest runners. Of the other 4, however, only Art and Stew could fly, although Stew, being a cockerel, could not fly very far and would have to start standing on a wall. That left Ock and Muriel for the swim. Ock was small and light, and a strong swimmer, as you might expect from a collie dog. Muriel could swim, but not very fast, and even if recently shorn, her wool would slow her down, and her legs, while not long, might well touch the pond bed a little too often. On the MacGregor side, Miranda assigned a duck and this duck to the flight race. Miranda herself could not fly. Even pigs who have drunk magic pond water cannot fly, but she also could not run. She was, she said apologetically, fat and slow, and would be better off swimming. Obviously, 40 could not enter the swimming race because she was too tall, so she must run. So that only left the sheep, who, if called upon to run around the pond, might well run in quite the wrong direction, especially if the rest of the flock was in a nearby field. And it left another duck, who was, not to put too fine a point on it, a duck. And ducks do not run well. Another duck nonetheless insisted that she could certainly finish the running race, although it might take a while. And it was generally agreed that the sheep, if close shorn and with some practice and encouragement, could probably swim across the pond twice. When Miranda found out that Muriel, the MacDonald sheep, was also entering the swimming event, that settled it. She said to herself that if the sheep saw Muriel swimming, it was likely that the sheep would follow another sheep. Miranda realised that another duck was not likely to do well in the land race, and the sheep was not likely to win the water race. Ock would certainly be faster than Muriel, and Miranda's whole strategy depended on the sheep following Muriel in the water. Miranda, however, was undeterred. She entrusted the task of training another duck to 40 the cow, who, several times daily, led the hapless duck waddling round the pond. I say several times daily. Another duck actually only went around the pond once, but 40 went several times during the day to check up on her. Miranda took the task of training the sheep to swim upon herself, and this was an opportunity to practice and wallow in the mud at the edge of the pond, if time allowed. After a week, Miranda succeeded in getting the sheep to walk far enough into the water to get the wool on her belly a little wet. This would have to do. The shared Pond Olympics were to take place this weekend. Now, MacDonald craftily arranged for MacGregor and his new wife, who for the time being was still known as the new Mrs. MacGregor, to be visiting with him, so he could contrive to have them witness the spectacle. And so it was that MacDonald, Mrs. MacDonald, MacGregor, and the new Mrs. MacGregor were all standing looking up at the splendid new weather vane that MacDonald had installed on the roof of the big barn, when they saw a heron alight on the rooftop, and 3 ducks and a cockerel line up on the red brick wall by the road. A gleaming red fox sat calmly looking at them from beside the corner of the barn. The fox barked once, and the 3 ducks and the cockerel jumped off the wall. There was much confused flapping, but the 3 ducks soon streaked ahead, and the cockerel bounced a few times against the wall of the barn, flapping furiously. By the time he tumbled into a pile of straw, the ducks had already completed 1 lap and passed whizzing over his head. One of the 3 ducks pulled ahead of the other 2 by passing dangerously close to the corner wall of the barn. After a second lap, the 3 ducks tried and failed, one after the other, to land on the wall. The heron flapped down beside the fox, and they consulted in a low murmur, and trotted and strode, each in his own way, off towards the pond. 4 fascinated farmers followed. At the edge of the pond, a plank had been laid perpendicular to the shore, and behind it patiently stood the old grey horse, a black and white cow, a brown cow, and a duck with a determined gleam in her eye. They looked restless as the fox and heron approached. The heron strode around them and lifted a long wing in front of them. They lined up carefully, their noses in line with the rounded tip of a black primary. The heron folded his wing, and the fox barked. The duck was the first away, but as soon as the cows took a single step, she was behind them. The old grey horse took a little longer to lumber up to speed, but although the cows were pretty fast, he soon overtook them, making 2 quick laps of the lake before the little duck had even reached the first posts of the overturned fence. The cows finished close behind, the black and white before the brown. The duck laboured. The fox and heron stared at it and seemed to be very discreetly arguing over something. Eventually they walked quietly over to a molehill and a bald head popped out. A 3-way discussion ensued and concluded. The fox walked down to the water's edge, and the heron flapped raggedly over to the other side of the pond, where, in a row at the edge of the MacGregor farmyard, stood a huge pig, a large sheep, a rather smaller sheep, and a small collie dog. The fox barked, and 3 of the 4 animals ran into the water. The larger sheep entered very tentatively, but seeing the enthusiasm of the dog and the determination of the pig, pushed on bravely. The smaller sheep walked a few paces into the water and stopped, baaing piteously. The heron circled low overhead. Little of the pig could be seen above the water, just the tip of her snout and occasional furiously thrashing trotter. The dog crossed first, ran out of the water, shook himself dry, and ran straight back into the water again, reaching the MacGregor side before either the pig or the sheep reached the MacDonald side. Eventually the pig hauled herself out of the pond and walked, slow and exhausted, over to where the fox was primly sitting, where she promptly sat down beside him and hung her head, although she appeared to be smiling. The sheep emerged soon afterwards, and took some time to recover her breath before plunging determinedly back in. After a while she re-emerged on the MacGregor side, and the farmer could just make out the shape of a determined duck waddling steadily across the MacGregor farmyard. The heron flapped back down to where the fox was sitting. All the animals gathered in the MacDonald farmyard and watched patiently as the little duck completed her first lap. At this point, Mrs. MacDonald went back into the house, and a while later came back with a tray of tea and cakes for their guests. By the time they had finished the tea and all of the cakes, they watched as the exhausted duck finally crossed the finish line. A cheer went up, although of course it was a mixture of moos, neighs, quacks, bars, and other squawking, so as cheers go, it was pretty unusual. The fox spoke. For the first time loud enough for the farmers to hear, the fox addressed the assembled company. Race. Won by Art the duck, 3 points. A duck and this duck came second, a total of 3 points. Stew the cockerel, disqualified. Less 1 point. A team win for MacGregor. Land race, won by Rab the horse, 3 points. 40 came second, 2 points. Mary came third, 1 point. Another duck finished the race. Team win for MacDonald. Water race, won by Ock the collie dog, 3 points. Muriel came second, but was disqualified for touching the pond bed too much. Less 1 point. Miranda did not finish, but is awarded 1 point for getting halfway. The sheep did not start. No points. Team win for MacDonald. Miranda the pig, still very tired in spite of having had much of the afternoon in which to recover, congratulated one of many on the MacDonald's win. Art the duck discussed his cornering technique with the MacGregor ducks, who vowed to a duck they would study his technique and win the next year. And you know, to this day, the Shared Pond Olympics continues. Sometimes the events vary a little. Sometimes the entry rules change. MacGregor is careful to have a good choice of animals in his farmyard, and MacDonald continues to take things as they come. Sometimes MacGregor wins and sometimes MacDonald wins, each according to how the animals suit the races. Although sometimes a little skill and a little practice can decide who wins out of two closely matched competitors. And sometimes luck or determination play a part too. However, Miranda the pig has never again attempted to teach a sheep to swim nor a duck to run, even though Muriel worked on her technique and the following year competed in the swimming without being disqualified. MacGregor and MacDonald don't talk about the Shared Pond Olympics even though they attend it every year, and that is why you've never heard of it before. The end. I hope you enjoyed my little story, and I hope you will come back to my YouTube channel again for more stories and more lessons about writing, and lessons about writing taught through stories. Goodbye.